Good morning. Good to see you.
Hey, good morning, James. It was good to see you as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Glad to talk a little bit. For those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, been in North Carolina for about 24 years. I grew up in West Virginia, went to school in Wake Forest and Winston-Salem, and
Good deeds.
absolutely. And two kids. My son's at App State, my daughter's at NC State, and we love it here. And I was in corporate America for many years, and kind of rising up through the ranks. And about 12, 13 years ago, started a company that helps clients save money. So, and name the company's Fractional Procurement Group.
Cool. I know we have a lot of common clients. And one of the reasons I wanted to record this and kind of get this out to my client base is you've done a great job for several of my clients, several clients that literally rave about what you do for them. So again, for those that don't know, tell us a little bit about how your business works and what you do for clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of the quick one sentence is we help make sure that you're paying market rates for services. We're helping make sure that, the rate you're getting charged by the trash company or the copiers or office supplies or phones or utilities is what you should be paying. And how do you know the business across the street's not paying half as much as you for the exact same service? And that's where we help. And we've realized that there's just a lot of opportunity in there. And one of the things that we're really proud of, our mission statement is to help our clients, spend less and accomplish more and fulfill their mission statement. So that's what we're really passionate about, James, is, if we can help save a YMCA or Ronald McDonald House or, whatever type of business money, that's real dollars that they can use to, teach a kid how to swim or go to camp or stay while their family's dealing with a child with cancer. So that's just what drives us. We are very passionate about helping and serving others.
Andy, what types of organizations are you typically working with? I know it's a kind of a mix of nonprofits and business, and then maybe like what size or what industry is there like a sweet spot where you feel like you really excel?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, James. And we help clients literally all across the country. So we're based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but we help them all over. Our clients range from, probably revenue of, a couple $1 million a year, all the way our largest clients, $2.5 billion with 20 locations across the country and their manufacturing company. So it's really across the board. There's not any, kind of size that we can't handle and work with. And then in terms of type of business, the expenses that we look at are kind of, I had a CFO, I think one time say, oh, it's the bottom half of the P&L, right? So those expenses are just there every month that are just there. And you don't know, hey, are we paying the right rate or not? So you're looking at expenses I mentioned, like trash and phones and copiers, utilities and maintenance supplies and just all those type things. And that's what we do. We just make sure, the rate you're being charged is fair. But really what's nice about it is almost every type of business has those expenses. So we're able to help nonprofits and for-profits and manufacturing and churches and schools and property management firms. So really it's across the board with who we help.
Yeah, it's interesting to me getting a bird's eye view into a lot of businesses. There's this hyper focus on sales and revenue generation. We'll pay salespeople $1 bazillion a year to come in and grow, and that's who the CEOs typically are, right? Or salespeople. But then, most organizations have a CFO or controller or finance director, but there tends to be less focus, in my opinion, on that back end. And, dollar saved is as valuable as a dollar earned in many ways, right? And so I love the focus on kind of an area where I think doesn't get a lot of focus. Let's talk about when you first engage with a client and you look at financials. Do you see some themes or trends where there are consistently hidden or overlooked costs? Like what are a couple categories where organizations are almost always overpaying?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And I love what you just said a second here too, that, and I think everybody fundamentally knows this, but sometimes I think people kind of can forget that if save a dollar and you're a 10% return company, that's like adding $10 in sales, right? So if we were to save $10,000, that's the equivalent of about $100,000 on the sales line. And so it's a massive amount that can just go straight to the bottom line. And to answer your question in terms of the hidden costs, what we found, James, is no two organizations are alike. We almost always find savings, but James, where your company might be doing really well in these 8 areas, and there's these 2 areas over here where, hey, you're actually paying more than what you should be. The next company could be doing really well in those 2 areas, but there's a different 3 areas that they're not doing well and that you are. And so it's interesting kind of looking at how that happens, but we're just literally looking at all those expenses that just help run the business. And again, it's the trash, it's the copiers, it's the phones, it's the internet, it's the payroll processing, it's the merchant card fees, it's the software fees. And one of the things James, just kind of it's a two-pronged thing. The expense is part of it, right? So it's absolutely, hey, are we paying kind of market rates? But half of it also is just, are you using the services you're paying for? Is your trash getting picked up twice a week, but the container is only half full? So could you go to once a week? Or are you paying for 30 software licenses and we do an audit and 10 people haven't logged in a year and you can reduce it to 20 licenses. So maybe the per license cost stays the same, but you're just making sure you're actually using what you're paying for. And so that's a really, I think, a big opportunity as well with that. And then also just over the years, prices creep up and plans change. So we help make sure you're on the right plan with whatever the vendor and partner is that you're using.
Yeah. It's definitely easy just to put things on autopilot, right? And we've used this vendor for 20 years. We trust them. They generally do a good job. Yeah, inflation, yada yada. We're going to go up every month, and it kind of goes up every year, and no one ever actually has a hard conversation. And it's really interesting to me when you get involved. I've seen this happen with some of our mutual clients, and you just ask a question. You're like, hey, could we save some money here? And they tend to get you back to where the market is.
Yeah, and most of the time, what ends up happening is the vendors, for the most part, they're not malicious trying to take advantage of customers. What happens most of the time, James, is there's auto renewal clauses in there. Maybe there's an agreement that's signed where there are no caps on increases. So maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 3 years ago, you had a really good rate. But if that's been going up 10, 12, 15% a year, all of a sudden you look up over those 6 or 7 years and it's kind of out of whack in terms of where you're at. And so most of the time, what we've seen is it's not something where the vendors are being mean or they're being malicious. It's just they've kind of taken their eye off the ball a little bit and we're able to help guide it and get it back where it needs to be. And then with that, we also help solve that problem by when we get a new agreement in place with the customer, et cetera. We also make sure there's caps on increases, there's no auto renewal terms. So we're also making sure they're signing a good sheet of paper so they don't end back up exactly where they're at today.
Yeah. What's a common misconception organizational leaders often have when they think about expense reduction?
I think a couple. I think some of them feel we're getting a good rate. And, it's interesting because when we've done the analysis, when we serve for-profit companies, we're getting savings just north of 20%. And then when we help nonprofits, the average savings is a little bit closer to 25%. And what we've realized is there's so much trust. We're like, why is that? And as a general rule, with nonprofits, they all have just the heart of gold. And they're like, hey, we're serving kids that are fighting cancer, or they are, struggling with this, or they're overcoming, this anxiety or whatever. And they just really believe, hey, everyone in our organization is so passionate about this. All of our vendors must be as well. And so I think sometimes they don't realize that it is still a business. You still have to make sure that you actually are paying what you should pay. And so I think one of the misconceptions is, hey, we're not, why would someone overcharge us? And so that's a big misconception of really going in there with it. And I would say another one is, and this is an interesting one, James, is, some customers will say, hey, we do RFPs or we get 3 quotes, right? And they're very proud that they get 3 quotes. And I always nicely say, hey, if you go get 3 quotes for trash or some other stuff, you're probably gonna get 3 kind of not great quotes. And so unless you know where those prices should be, you're not still going to get where you should be paying for that service. And that's one of the nice things about us. We've collected so much data over the last decade plus that we literally can look at an invoice and know exactly what that vendor should be paying
Yeah.
or charging for the customer.
Sure. Can you walk through a quick example of a particular client engagement? And I don't know how it works with confidentiality and things like that. So feel free to anonymize it if the particular name of the client, but maybe a specific example of how you've engaged with a client, what you found, what you changed, and the result.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy to give a couple of those. And one, I would say, just a copier example. So when we look at it, in addition to everything we talked about with the rates, we also know, hey, what is the right setup for these agreements? And a lot of times, just like in the copier industry, the copier company will come in and say, hey, James, you all use on average 10,000 copies a month. So they'll build in 10,000 copies a month into your lease. And it all sounds great. But then when you think about it, hey, step back for a second. If you do over 10,000, you do 11,000 copies, they're going to send you a bill for those extra 1,000. But if you only do 9,000, they're going to put their hands in their pocket and say, hey, James, kind of thanks for overpaying us. And so that's not the right way to set it up. So the right way to set it up is you have, the lease rate, and then you just pay for the actual copies that you make. And that way, it's the true math, if you will. And so just knowing some of those things help enormously. And to answer your question, we helped a client one time where they were paying for about 400,000 copies a year. And we did the analysis. They were towards the end of their agreement. They were only averaging about 150,000 a year. So they literally had been paying for 250,000 copies a year
Yeah.
that we weren't using. And one of the things that I always like to say is, our heart in this is we're not for the client. We're not for the vendor. We're for the relationship. So we want it to work. And that's one of the things is if you're happy with your partner and vendors, we want them to remain. And like in this case, because at the very end of the contract, the CFO said, hey, they've been overcharging us. We want a new vendor. If we had been able to get engaged with them sooner, we could have saved that relationship with that vendor and for that vendor and the customer. So that's what we're all about. We're just here to serve. But that's a good example of just how we can get in there, and that's not anything to do with the rate. That's just they're paying for services they're not using. And then others would be, there's literally hundreds of examples every month that I could share. But one of them is trash, where the trash rate has creeped up, and we've helped clients kind of all over the country, and they're overpaying by sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times what they should be paying for the same services. So we go in there and just again make sure they're paying market rates and they're paying what they should pay, and we help get that in place. So lots of examples just kind of across the board, but those are the couple that come to mind.
Great. If someone's thinking about working with you, what's what's the first step to kind of get engaged with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And from the very beginning, we have tried to make it super easy for our clients. So when we initially start, we just ask for an accounts payable report with the vendors that have been paid and how much over the last year. Then we go in and highlight and say, hey, based on this and what we know, here's some of the vendors to look at. And then once we get one or two invoices from the client, we even know just from the invoice where those rates should be. And then at that point, the client doesn't have really anything to do. We go and work and make sure the rates are in place and negotiate that. And we don't make any decisions on behalf of the client. They still are in control of signing the paperwork and everything. We're just making sure that we're helping them and kind of doing the grunt work with helping them. So it's an easy process for our clients. And I think it's been part of our key to our success, James.
What about the executive that says, I don't have time? I run into that from time to time with legal. I'm sure you do as well. Hey, that sounds good. I like the idea of saving 20% on my ex vendor bill, but I don't have time. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. We are all slammed, and that's why we've done the process the way we've done it. Is once we have that AP report and the some invoices, we're kind of done. Like you're done in terms of from the customer side what we need from you, and your work is over. So it is extremely a minimal amount of time. 'Cause you don't have time for that. You don't have time to start going back and forth to the trash and the copier and phones and all that kind of stuff. So that's really part of how we're wired, James, is to make it easy on our clients.
The other objection that I might guess you might get from time to time is, well, how much does it cost, right? If you're going to save me X on this vendor and you're going to charge me Y, and it's basically a wash, and I got to deal with the dissettling of the relationships and the additional emails and things, like what's your response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And our model is based on a share of the savings. So we will simply share in the savings. And so if we save you a dollar, we share in that dollar. And then we also bill quarterly in arrears. So if we save a dollar in January, February, March, we don't even send an invoice until April. That way, we can make sure and you can make sure, hey, if that rate was supposed to go from $1,000 a month to $800 a month, did that actually happen? And there's nothing you need to budget for because we're paid out of the savings. So we kind of have a really good process to make sure that connects and just make sure there's nothing to budget for and the savings is in fact happening.
Sure. Cool. All right. If you could give one piece of advice to business executive who's in the C-suite in a nonprofit or a business, If you give them one piece of advice around managing expenses over the next year or two, what would that be?
I would say two that come to mind. It's one is knowing when your existing agreements end. One of the things we realize is no matter how big or small companies are, they have no idea the start date, the end date, the renewal date, does it auto renew? And they don't know that. So then it's one thing we can help track and all that kind of good stuff. But it's knowing what's in place now. And then off of that, are you using the services you're paying for? So similar to what you do at your house, right? Hey, are you really using
Yeah.
Netflix and Hulu and Disney and all that kind of stuff? What are you actually using? It's the same thing in your business. So when you're looking at it, are you using all those seats in in that software vendor, or are you using all the phone lines? Some people have moved to other options other than the traditional phone lines. Are you still needing all those? So just kind of an audit and just saying, hey, what we're paying for, are we still using those services? And then obviously you can adjust from there. But those are probably the two that I would say every business can do and should do just to make sure their house is in order.
Yeah, I see that amongst my client base. The larger the client is, and the bigger the revenue is, and the way the budget reads. And then you have turnover. Like you got a new CFO, new controller. The business has been around multiple generations. There's just something on the budget. It's been there forever, and the explanation is, "Oh yeah, we use that. It's been there forever." And it's like, I've seen some companies actually go the other way, where they're like, "Hey, we're cutting everything, and we're only adding back what we need." And that process, I think, is really healthy to do every so often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we opened a nonprofit a couple years ago, and they had like after school programs, and so they had after school programs and everything. And we did the audit. They had a bunch of phone lines that were installed at the different after school places. And what ended up happening is they would no longer be in that location for after school, and so that portion would close down, if you will, or whatever, and they would go to another after school facility. But no one called AT&T and told them to cancel the phone line. So AT&T kept sending the bill. Well, finance, who has nothing to do with the operations, kept paying it. And then it just kept the cycle. So what we found is they were paying for close to a year for phone lines they weren't using, end up saving about 30% just on phone lines that literally could just be cut off. So super important to do that exercise to just make sure you're using what you're paying for.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I think what we said in the beginning is just we have such a heart to serve, and we would much rather instead of that extra $1,000 going to AT&T or Xerox or Pitney Bowes, we'd much rather that go to our client's mission and help them with whatever it is. They're going to be a better steward of that than AT&T probably is with that $1,000 or whatever for that in that example. So we love to help, and if we can help in any way, we'd be honored to. But yeah, we're excited to be invited with you, James, and we just think the world of you and Michael Best, and can't say enough nice things about you and your firm.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the company is Fractional Procurement Group. And so just fractionalprocurement.com is the website. And then my email address is simply a Crawford at fractionalprocurement.com. And phone number is 919-696-4567.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate your friendship, man, your partnership. Like it's always special when you get somebody that you like, and it's also doing great work for the same clients. And it really resonates with me when you talk about a dollar saved is a dollar that goes back into mission. We talk about that with our nonprofit clients a lot. We obviously have business clients as well, but in the nonprofit sector, it's a little bit easier to understand and talk about. But we wish we could never spend a dollar on legal, but right, we have to, right? Because if we don't spend a dollar on legal, then it's going to come back and it might be more dollars than we would have spent initially. But we hold that intention with, a dollar that we don't have to spend goes back into mission, and your business lines up squarely with that, which is something that's very important to me. So thanks for the work that you're doing.
You bet. Happy to help.
All right, man. Good to see you. Have a great day.
Thanks, James.